The wagon lurched into Winnemucca, Nevada on a blistering afternoon in August of 1882. Dust swirling around its worn wheels like ghosts of 1,000 broken promises, and Nora Nielson gripped the reins with hands that had forgotten what softness felt like. Behind her in the wagon bed, 4 children huddled together against the sun, their faces smudged with dirt and exhaustion. 10-year-old Samuel pressed himself against the wooden slats, trying to shield his younger siblings from the worst of the heat. 8-year-old Margaret clutched her rag doll with fierce determination. The twins, 5-year-old Benjamin and Beatrice, had finally stopped crying about an hour back, their small voices worn out from 3 weeks of hard travel. Nora had left Missouri with everything she owned crammed into that wagon, fleeing the farm that had taken her husband and nearly broken her spirit. Cholera had swept through their county like wildfire, claiming Daniel and leaving her with 4 mouths to feed and land. She could not work alone. His brother had offered to take the farm in exchange for keeping her on as an unpaid servant, his eyes already calculating how quickly he could marry her off to one of his friends. She had loaded the wagon in the dead of night instead, taking only what was rightfully hers, and heading west with a stubbornness that had kept her alive this long. The main street of Winnemucca stretched before her like a promise she was afraid to believe in. False-fronted buildings lined both sides, their paint weathered by desert wind and relentless sun. A saloon stood on one corner, music drifting out even at this hour. Across the way, a general store displayed goods in dusty windows. Men in wide-brimmed hats walked the wooden boardwalks, some stopping to stare at her wagon as it passed. She felt their eyes on her like a physical weight, measuring, judging, wondering what a woman alone was doing in their town with a wagon full of children. She pulled the horses to a stop in front of the general store, her arms trembling with fatigue. 3 weeks of driving had worn her down to something barely recognizable. She had been pretty once, Daniel used to say, with hair the color of honey and eyes that caught the light. Now she saw only a worn-out woman when she glimpsed her reflection in still water, someone aged beyond her 26 years. "Stay here," she told the children, her voice hoarse. "Do not leave this wagon." Samuel nodded solemnly, already reaching for Benjamin, who had started to squirm. The boy was too young to understand they had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, nothing but the few dollars sewn into the lining of her skirt and the desperate hope that Nevada might be kinder than Missouri had been. The store was blessedly cool inside, shadowy and smelling of leather and coffee and something sweet she could not quite place. A thin man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Help you, madam." "I need supplies," Nora said, pulling out her carefully hoarded money. "Flour, beans, salt pork if you have it, and I need to know if there is work in this town for someone willing to do anything honest." The storekeeper studied her for a long moment. "You come far, Missouri." "I have 4 children. My husband passed 3 months back." He nodded slowly, pulling out a ledger. "Work is scarce for women here, I will not lie to you. Most ranches have their own cooks and housekeepers. Town has a laundress already, and she does not take kindly to competition." "You have any particular skills?" Nora felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I can cook, clean, sew, work a garden. I kept books for my husband's farm. I can read and write and do sums." "That is more than most," the storekeeper said, not unkindly. "But I do not know who would be hiring right now. You have family here." "No one." The door opened behind her, letting in a blast of hot air and the jingle of spurs. Nora turned slightly, not wanting to be rude but needing to keep her attention on the storekeeper who held her immediate fate in his hands. The man who had entered was tall and lean, built like someone who spent his life in the saddle. He wore dusty denim and a shirt that had once been blue, a bandana tied around his neck, and a hat that shadowed his face. When he lifted his head, she saw he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 30 at most, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a winter sky. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous look that was softened somehow by the gentleness in his expression. "Keith," the storekeeper said, relief evident in his voice. "This lady just arrived from Missouri, widow with 4 children, looking for work." The cowboy, Keith, studied her with those careful eyes. Nora lifted her chin, refusing to look away even though exhaustion made her want to crumble. She had learned that showing weakness in front of men was a mistake. "What kind of work?" Keith asked, his voice low and rough like he did not use it much. "Any kind that is honest and pays." "You run from something," the directness of the question startled her. "I ran from becoming property. My husband's brother wanted my farm and thought I came with it. I chose otherwise." Something flickered in Keith's expression, approval maybe, or understanding. "You have anywhere to stay tonight?" "Not yet. I was hoping to find something affordable, at least until I can figure out what comes next." Keith was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. She noticed his fingers were calloused, scarred across the knuckles. Working hands like Daniel's had been. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside town. I run cattle, do some horse breaking. Lost my housekeeper last month when she moved back east to live with her daughter. Place has been falling apart without someone to manage it properly. I do not have much time for cooking or cleaning when I am working from sunup to sundown." Nora felt hope flare in her chest, dangerous and bright. "You are offering me work." "I am offering you and your children a place to stay and wages for keeping house. $20 a month, room and board included. You would have your own quarters, separate from mine. I am not looking for anything improper, just someone who can manage a household so I can manage my stock." It was more than she had dared hope for. $20 a month would let her save, maybe eventually buy a small place of her own. Room and board meant her children would be fed and sheltered, but years of hard lessons made her cautious. "Why would you offer this to a stranger?" Keith met her eyes steadily. "Because I remember what it is like to have nothing and no one. Because those children in your wagon look like they need a safe place to land. Because I need help and you need work, and that seems like a fair trade to me." The storekeeper was nodding. "Keith Lancaster is a good man, madam. Known him since he came to this valley 6 years ago. He will treat you fair and proper." Nora looked between them, weighing the risk against the alternative. She could try to make it further west, but her money would not last long and the wagon was barely holding together. She could stay in town and hope something turned up, but sleeping in the wagon with 4 children was not sustainable. Or she could trust that maybe, just maybe, luck had finally turned in her direction. "I accept," she said. "When do you want us to start? How about we get you supplied up here, then you can follow me out to the ranch. Get you and the children settled before dark." Keith helped her purchase flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, and a few other necessities, adding extras she had not asked for: sugar, dried fruit, fresh eggs wrapped carefully in straw. When she tried to protest the expense, he shook his head. "You will need these for cooking. Consider it part of your wages." Outside, the children had climbed down from the wagon and were standing in a tight cluster, eyes wide as they watched the unfamiliar town. Margaret had Benjamin's hand gripped tight, while Samuel stood in front of Beatrice like a small sentinel. Nora felt her heart squeeze at the sight of them, so young and already so hardened by loss. "Children, this is Mr. Lancaster. He has offered us work and a place to stay on his ranch." Keith crouched down, bringing himself to their eye level. "You can call me Keith if your mama says it is all right. I have a dog named Rufus who will be excited to meet you, and a barn cat who is mean as a snake, but sometimes lets people pet her if they are patient. You like animals? Benjamin nodded shyly while Beatrice pressed closer to Margaret. Samuel studied Keith with serious dark eyes that looked too old for his face. "Will you hurt our mama?" the boy asked. "Samuel," Nora gasped, mortified, but Keith did not seem offended. He looked at Samuel with respect, man to man. "No, son, I will not. Part of being a good man is protecting those who need protecting and dealing fair with everyone. You have my word on that." Samuel nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his small shoulders. "Okay then." The ride out to Keith's ranch took nearly an hour, following a rutted road that wound through sagebrush and desert scrub. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the bright sky. The sun beat down mercilessly, but Keith set a steady pace that did not push the horses too hard. Nora followed his horse with the wagon, grateful that she did not have to figure out the way on her own. The ranch appeared gradually, first a windmill spinning lazily, then a barn and several outbuildings, and finally the house itself. It was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. The paint was peeling and the yard was overgrown, but the bones of the place were good. Keith dismounted and came to help her down from the wagon. His hands were gentle on her waist, steady and impersonal. "This is it. Not fancy, but the roof does not leak and the well runs clean." Nora looked around, seeing possibilities everywhere. The porch needed sweeping, the windows washing, the yard clearing, but underneath the neglect was a place that could be beautiful. "It is wonderful." He seemed pleased by her reaction. "Let me show you the house. Children, you want to come meet Rufus." As if summoned, a large yellow dog came bounding around the corner of the house, tail wagging so hard his whole back end swung with it. The twins squealed with delight, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Even Samuel smiled as the dog pushed his nose into their hands, desperate for attention. The house was dim and cool inside, a relief from the relentless heat. The front door opened into a spacious main room with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. Comfortable but worn furniture was arranged around it, a sofa with faded upholstery, 2 chairs, a low table. Dust covered everything and cobwebs hung in the corners. "Kitchen is through there," Keith said, pointing to a doorway. "Bedroom's upstairs. I used the one at the front. Thought you and your girls could take the big room on the left. Boys can have the smaller one next to it. There is a third room for storage and such." Nora followed him through the house, her mind already cataloging what needed to be done. The kitchen was well appointed with a good stove, a pump sink that actually worked, and plenty of cabinet space. Dishes were piled in the sink, and the floor needed scrubbing, but again, the foundation was sound. Upstairs, the bedrooms were spacious with real beds, not straw ticks on the floor. The room Keith indicated for her, and the girls had 2 beds and a dresser, plus a small window that looked out over the yard. The boys' room was smaller but still comfortable, with 1 bed that Samuel and Benjamin could share. "I know it is not much," Keith said, standing in the doorway. "It is more than we have had in a very long time," Nora said honestly. "Mr. Lancaster, Keith, please, Keith. I want you to know I will work hard for you. I will not take advantage of your kindness." He nodded, something unreadable in his expression. "I believe you. Now, I am going to see to my horse and check on the stock. You get yourself and the children settled. There should be bedding in the chest at the end of the hall. If you feel up to it later, there is bacon and eggs in the cold cellar, flour in the kitchen. But if you are too tired, do not worry about cooking tonight. You have had a long journey." After he left, Nora stood in the center of the bedroom for a long moment, listening to the children's voices drift up from below as they played with Rufus in the yard. For the first time in months, she felt something unknot in her chest. It was not security, not yet, but it was hope. And hope was more than she had dared feel in a very long time. She unpacked their few belongings, putting clothes in the dresser, hanging Daniel's old coat on a peg because she could not bring herself to get rid of it yet. She made up the beds with the sheets she found in the chest, beating the dust out of them first. The children trooped upstairs eventually, their faces flushed from playing. "Mama, there are chickens," Beatrice announced. "And Keith said we can collect the eggs sometimes if we are gentle." "Can I really sleep in a real bed?" Benjamin asked, his eyes wide. "You can, sweet boy, all of you. We have a home now, at least for a while." Samuel climbed onto his new bed, testing the mattress. "It is soft. I almost forgot what soft felt like." Nora had to turn away so they would not see her eyes fill with tears. These children, who had lost so much and asked for so little, deserved everything she could not give them. But maybe here, on this dusty ranch in Nevada, they could find a little bit of peace. That evening, she made bacon and eggs and biscuits, cooking in a kitchen that actually had everything she needed. Keith came in as the sun was setting, his face and clothes covered in dust. He washed up at the pump outside, then sat at the table with them. The children were shy at first, speaking only when spoken to, but Keith had a gentle way about him that slowly drew them out. "Do you have any children, Mr. Keith?" Margaret asked. "No, I do not. Never been married." "Why not?" Beatrice wanted to know. "Beatrice, that is rude," Nora said quickly. But Keith shook his head. "It is all right. Honest answer. I have been too busy building this place to think much about courting, and I have not met anyone who made me want to change that, but I like children just fine, so you are all welcome here." After dinner, Nora shooed the children upstairs to wash and get ready for bed. She cleaned the kitchen, washing dishes in water heated on the stove, wiping down the table and counters. Keith sat on the porch, and she could hear the creak of the rocking chair as he moved. When the children were settled, she made herself a cup of coffee and joined him outside. The night was cool, stars scattered across the sky in a brilliant display impossible to see in town. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "They are good children," Keith said. "You have done well with them. They have been through too much for their ages. But yes, they are good. Samuel tries to be the man of the family now. It breaks my heart a little. He will find his way back to being a boy again, given time and safety. They all will." Nora sipped her coffee, gathering courage. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why are you really doing this? You could have hired a housekeeper from town, someone without complications. 4 children are a lot to take on, even indirectly." Keith was quiet for a long moment, his face shadowed in the darkness. "My parents died when I was 8. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I had 2 younger sisters. We got split up, sent to different families who did not really want us. I never saw my sisters again. Do not even know if they are still alive." Nora felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry. It was a long time ago, but I remember what it felt like to be that scared, that alone. When I saw your wagon today, saw those children, I saw myself. Figured if I could help, I should. We do not get many chances in this life to make things right. Seemed like this might be one of them. You are a good man, Keith Lancaster. I am just a man trying to do right when I can. That is all any of us can hope for." They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Nora felt exhaustion pulling at her, but it was a clean exhaustion now, not the desperate weariness of uncertainty. She had work, her children had beds, and tomorrow she could start building something resembling a life again. The first weeks at the ranch established a rhythm that felt almost normal. Nora rose before dawn to make breakfast: eggs from the chickens, bacon from the cold cellar, biscuits hot from the oven, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Keith ate quickly and headed out to work, usually not returning until midday for a quick lunch before disappearing again until supper. She threw herself into transforming the house, attacking years of bachelor neglect with determination. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, washed windows until they sparkled, beat dust out of every rug and curtain. She organized the kitchen, mended torn curtains, and patched holes in worn clothing she found in Keith's room. The children helped as they could, even the twins learning to gather eggs and pull weeds from the struggling vegetable garden. Samuel took to following Keith around when he could, watching how he handled the horses and cattle with quiet fascination. Keith never seemed to mind, explaining what he was doing and sometimes letting the boy help with simple tasks. Margaret discovered the barn cat, a grumpy tortoiseshell named Spitfire, and spent hours trying to win her affection. The twins played in the yard with Rufus, their laughter filling the air in a way that made Nora's heart ache with relief. Keith was unfailingly kind but kept his distance, polite and respectful to the point of being almost formal. He praised her cooking, thanked her for her work, and never once made her feel like anything other than an employee. It should have been exactly what she wanted, a professional arrangement with clear boundaries. But as September faded into October, Nora found herself noticing things she should not. The way Keith's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at something one of the children said. How gentle his hands were when he showed Samuel how to curry a horse. The tired set of his shoulders when he came in after a particularly hard day, and how he still made time to ask about each child before dragging himself upstairs. She noticed he had started shaving more regularly, that his shirts were a little less dusty when he came in for meals, that he sometimes lingered over coffee in the evening instead of disappearing immediately after supper. She told herself she was being foolish. She had no business thinking about Keith Lancaster as anything other than her employer. She was a widow with 4 children, still raw from losing Daniel, focused only on building security for her family. Romance was a luxury she could not afford. But her heart, apparently, had not gotten that message. One afternoon in mid-October, she was taking down laundry from the line when Keith rode up earlier than usual. His face was tight with pain, and he was holding his left arm at an odd angle. "What happened?" she asked, hurrying over. "Horse spooked and threw me into a fence post, caught my shoulder wrong. It is nothing." "It is not nothing. You can barely move your arm. Get inside and let me look at it." For once, he did not argue. In the kitchen, she carefully helped him remove his shirt, trying not to notice the lean muscle of his back or the various scars that marked his skin. His shoulder was already swelling, an ugly bruise spreading across the joint. "Can you lift your arm?" He tried and went white, breath hissing between his teeth. "Not much. I do not think it is broken, but it is badly wrenched. You need to rest it for at least a week." "I do not have time to rest. Cattle do not take care of themselves. They will have to manage." "You push this and you could do permanent damage." She made a sling from a spare sheet, binding his arm close to his body despite his protests. Then she dosed him with willow bark tea for the pain and ordered him to sit down. The children gathered around, worried. "Is Keith going to be all right?" Beatrice asked, her small face pinched with concern. "He will be fine, sweet girl. He just needs to rest and let himself heal." Over the next few days, Keith proved to be a terrible patient. He tried to work one-handed, insisted he was fine, and generally made himself miserable trying to keep up with his usual routine. Finally, Nora had enough. "You are paying me to manage this household," she said firmly. "That includes making sure you do not kill yourself through sheer stubbornness. Samuel and I can handle the essential chores. The rest can wait. Now sit down and stay down before I have to tie you to that chair." Keith stared at her, surprised. Then, slowly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Yes, madam." Samuel took his role as assistant rancher seriously, rising early to help with feeding and watering under Keith's verbal instruction. Nora handled everything else, discovering muscles she had forgotten she had. It was exhausting work, but she had grown up on a farm and the skills came back quickly. One evening, when the children were in bed and Keith's shoulder was finally starting to heal, they sat on the porch together as had become their habit. The October air was cool, hinting at the winter to come. "Thank you," Keith said quietly, "for taking care of things, for taking care of me." "You did not have to do that. Of course I did. You took us in when we had nowhere to go. You have been nothing but kind to my children. This is the least I can do. It is more than I had any right to expect." He paused, turning his coffee cup in his good hand. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you miss him?" "Your husband?" Nora considered the question carefully. "I miss what we had, or what I thought we had. Daniel was a good man in many ways. He worked hard, he provided for us. He never raised his hand to me or the children, but he was not easy to know. He kept his thoughts to himself, and I often felt like I was living with a stranger who just happened to share my house." "That sounds lonely." "It was, sometimes. I loved him because he was my husband and the father of my children, and I grieved when he died. But I wonder sometimes if we were ever really in love or if we just found each other convenient. I was alone and needed a home. He was a farmer who needed a wife. We filled needs for each other. You want more than that, if you could have it." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Nora looked at Keith's profile in the darkness, seeing the careful way he held himself, the tension in his jaw. Her heart beat faster. "I think everyone wants to be seen," she said slowly, "to be known, to matter to someone beyond what they can provide." "You matter," Keith said, his voice rough. "To me. Not because of what you do, though you have transformed this place and I am grateful for it, but because of who you are, your strength, your kindness to your children. The way you face everything life throws at you and keep moving forward. I see you, Nora. I want you to know that." Tears pricked her eyes. "Keith, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you are still grieving, still finding your footing. I know you might not ever see me as anything but your employer, but I wanted you to know, you are not invisible, not to me." Nora reached out, laying her hand over his. "You are not invisible to me either." They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching, the desert night stretched out around them. It was not a declaration of love, not yet. But it was a beginning, and beginnings were precious things. November brought cold winds and the first threat of winter. Keith's shoulder healed, though it still bothered him in the mornings. The cattle had to be moved to winter pasture, a week-long job that left him exhausted and short-tempered. Nora made sure he ate properly, packed him lunches that would sustain him through long days, and had hot baths waiting when he returned each evening. The children were thriving. Samuel had grown 2 inches and filled out, no longer the half-starved boy who had arrived in August. Margaret's nightmares had faded, and she smiled more readily. The twins were bright and energetic, their earlier trauma slowly being replaced by the security of routine and abundance. They had a home and they knew it. One Saturday, Keith announced he was taking the day off. "We need supplies from town, and I thought the children might like to come along. Make a day of it." The children were thrilled, chattering excitedly as they piled into the wagon. Nora sat on the bench seat next to Keith, acutely aware of his presence beside her. He had shaved that morning and put on a clean shirt, and she wondered if he was making an effort or if she was reading too much into things. Winnemucca was busier than the last time Nora had seen it, the streets full of ranchers and miners in town for the weekend. Keith handled the supply run efficiently, then surprised her by taking them all to the hotel dining room for lunch. "You do not have to do this," Nora protested. "I want to." "When was the last time you had a meal someone else cooked?" She could not remember. They ordered roast chicken and potatoes, pie for dessert. The children were on their best behavior, conscious of being in a fancy establishment. Nora felt self-conscious in her worn calico dress, but Keith seemed proud to be seen with them, introducing her to several ranchers who stopped by the table. "This is Nora Nielson, my housekeeper," he would say. "And these are her children." Not my housekeeper and her children, she noticed. Just the statement of fact, delivered with a warmth that made her think he saw them as more than employees. After lunch, Keith took them to the general store and told the children they could each pick one thing. Samuel chose a book about horses. Margaret selected hair ribbons. Benjamin wanted peppermint sticks. Beatrice fell in love with a small wooden doll with a painted face. "Keith, this is too much," Nora said as he paid for everything. "They are good children and they deserve a treat. Let me do this." She gave in, touched by his generosity. On the way home, the children dozed in the back of the wagon, worn out from the excitement. Nora found herself leaning slightly against Keith's shoulder, exhaustion and contentment making her bold. "Thank you for today. They will remember this. I hope they remember a lot of good days." "I hope we all do." Winter settled over northern Nevada with surprising gentleness. There was snow in December, but not the brutal blizzards that could paralyze the region. Keith taught the children to sled down the hill behind the barn using old pieces of wood. Nora baked Christmas cookies and made paper decorations with the children to hang around the house. On Christmas Eve, Keith disappeared into town and returned with presents: a new doll for each girl, a jackknife for Benjamin, and a lariat for Samuel. For Nora, he had a beautiful shawl in soft blue wool. "Keith, I cannot accept this. It is too fine. I want you to have it. I want you to have something beautiful." She made him a shirt from fabric she had bought with her own carefully saved money, each stitch placed with care. When he opened it Christmas morning, she saw his eyes grow bright. "No one has made me anything since my mother died. Thank you, Nora. I will treasure it." They spent the day together, eating a special dinner of roasted chicken and the last of the autumn vegetables from the root cellar. Keith played simple games with the children, patient even when Benjamin got overexcited and accidentally knocked over a chair. As Nora watched him laugh with her children, she felt something shift in her heart, a recognition that what she felt for him had moved far beyond gratitude or friendship. That night, after the children were asleep, they stood together on the porch despite the cold. "This was the best Christmas I have had in years," Keith said. "Maybe ever. Thank you for making it special. You are the one who made it special. You have given us so much, Keith. Not just a home and work, but kindness. Family. I do not know how to tell you what that means." He turned to face her, his eyes serious in the lamplight spilling from the window. "I think I am falling in love with you, Nora. I did not plan it, did not expect it. But somewhere between August and now, you became the person I think about when I wake up, the one I look forward to seeing, the one who makes this house feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. I know it might be too soon for you, and I will wait as long as you need. But I wanted you to know where my heart is." Nora felt tears spill down her cheeks. "It is not too soon. I think I have been falling in love with you too, and it terrified me. I was married to Daniel for 8 years and never felt for him what I feel for you after a few months. I thought there was something wrong with me. There is nothing wrong with you. Sometimes hearts just recognize each other." Keith reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "Can I kiss you?" please." The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question being asked and answered. His lips were warm despite the cold, and he tasted like the coffee they had shared after dinner. Nora felt herself melting into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as fast as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Keith rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, marry you if you will have me. I want to adopt those children and give them my name, make them legally mine so no one can ever take them from you or hurt them. I want us to be a real family." "Yes," Nora whispered. "Yes to all of it." They stood wrapped in each other's arms, the cold forgotten, the stars blazing overhead. Nora thought of the desperate woman who had driven into Winnemucca 5 months ago with nothing but fear and determination. She could not have imagined this, could not have dreamed she would find not just safety but love, not just a job but a partner. The new year brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Keith formally proposed in January, presenting her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, one of the few things he had kept from his childhood. They decided to wait until spring to marry, wanting to give the children time to adjust and to allow Keith to make necessary improvements to the house. Samuel was thrilled, immediately declaring that he wanted to change his last name to Lancaster. Margaret asked if she could call Keith Papa, and when he said yes, she threw herself into his arms. The twins were too young to fully understand, but absorbed the general happiness. February brought bitter cold and a sickness that swept through the valley. Keith fell ill first, a fever that left him shaking and delirious. Nora tended him through 3 terrifying days, sponging him with cool water, forcing medicine down his throat, praying to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. When the fever finally broke, she wept with relief. Then the twins fell sick. Benjamin recovered quickly, but Beatrice struggled, her small body fighting the infection. For a week, Nora barely slept, rocking her daughter through the long nights, singing soft songs, bargaining with fate. Keith, still weak himself, sat with her, fetching whatever she needed, taking turns so she could rest. "She is going to be all right," he would say over and over. "She is strong like her mother." And Beatrice was. Slowly, painfully, she improved. By mid-March, the crisis had passed and the household returned to normal, though Nora felt like she had aged a decade. "I do not know what I would have done without you," she told Keith one evening. "If I had still been on the road or alone in some rented room in town, I might have lost her. But you did not, and you will never have to face anything alone again. That is what family means." They were married on a Sunday in April at the small church in Winnemucca. Nora wore a new dress in dove gray, a compromise between her widow status and her joy. The children stood with them, Samuel holding the rings, the girls in matching dresses Nora had sewn. Keith looked handsome in a dark suit he had bought specially for the occasion, his face solemn as he spoke his vows. "I promise to love and cherish you, to stand beside you through everything life brings, to be a father to your children and a partner in all things. You are my heart, Nora, and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the gift you have given me." Nora could barely speak past the lump in her throat. "You are already worthy. You have shown me what love should look like, patient and kind and steady. You have given us a home and a future. I promise to love you, to support you, to build this life with you. You are my answered prayer, the blessing I did not know to ask for." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Keith kissed her gently, mindful of the children watching. But there was promise in that kiss, a commitment that went deeper than words. The whole town turned out for the reception at the hotel, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. Several ranchers congratulated Keith on his good fortune, and more than one woman told Nora she had landed herself a fine man. She agreed, pride and love making her glow. That night, after the children were settled and the house was quiet, Keith carried Nora across the threshold of what was now their shared bedroom. He set her down carefully, then just held her, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I love you," he murmured. "My wife, my Nora. I love you too. My husband, my Keith." Their first months of marriage were an adjustment for everyone. The children had to learn to respect that Keith was now their father, not just their friend. Samuel tested boundaries, pushing to see if Keith would send him away when he misbehaved. Keith remained patient but firm, consistent in his expectations and his affection. Margaret blossomed under the security of having two parents who loved each other and her. She started helping Nora with more complex tasks, learning to cook and sew with increasing skill. The twins were simply happy, secure in a way that children need to be. Keith and Nora had to learn each other as husband and wife, navigating the intimacy of sharing a life completely. But they had built their relationship on friendship and respect, and that foundation made the learning easier. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. They worked side by side, managing the ranch and household as true partners. In June, Nora realized she was pregnant. She told Keith one evening after the children were asleep, nervous about his reaction. They had never discussed having children together, and she worried he might feel trapped, but Keith's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "A baby, really? Nora, that is wonderful." He pulled her into his arms, laughing. "Do you think the children will be excited or jealous?" "Probably both. Are you happy?" "Truly, I am thrilled. A child that is part of you and part of me, a symbol of our love. How could I be anything but happy?" they told the children the next day. Samuel looked thoughtful, then asked if this meant he was going to be a big brother to someone from the very beginning. Margaret immediately started planning what the baby would need. The twins wanted to know if they could teach the baby to play with Rufus. "You will all be wonderful big siblings," Nora assured them. "This baby is very lucky to have you." The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones, perhaps because she was not worn down by constant worry and hard labor. Keith was attentive without being overbearing, making sure she rested when she needed to but not treating her like she was fragile. The ranch was doing well, the cattle bringing in good prices, which meant they could afford small luxuries. In July, Keith hired a ranch hand named Tom to help with the heavier work, telling Nora he wanted to spend more time with the family. They took Sunday picnics down by the creek, went on wagon rides to look at the mountains, played endless games in the evening. It was an idyllic time, almost dreamlike in its contentment. The baby arrived on a cold February morning, exactly 1 year after Beatrice's illness. The birth was hard but not dangerous, and when Keith heard the baby's first cry, he rushed into the room despite the midwife's protests. "A son," the woman announced, placing the squalling infant in Nora's arms. Healthy and strong, Keith looked at his son with wonder, tears streaming unabashedly down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Nora. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel Keith, honoring both the man who had given Nora her first family and the one who had given her a second. The children adored their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him. Samuel took his role as oldest very seriously, always checking to make sure the baby was all right. Margaret sang to him. The twins tried to share their toys, not quite understanding that a newborn could not play yet. Keith was a devoted father, walking the floor with Daniel when he fussed at night so Nora could sleep. He changed diapers without complaint, made silly faces to earn smiles, and narrated everything he did when he carried the baby around. Watching him, Nora fell in love with him all over again. "You are wonderful with him," she said one evening, watching Keith rock Daniel to sleep. "I am just trying to be the father I wished I had, the father all these children deserve." By the time Daniel was 6 months old, toddling around on unsteady legs and babbling nonsense, the household had found its new rhythm. The ranch was prosperous enough that Keith hired another hand, which gave him even more time with his family. They added on to the house, building a larger bedroom for Samuel and a separate room for Margaret, who at 12 needed her privacy. The twins started school in town, riding in with Keith when he went for supplies and staying with the storekeeper's wife until he picked them up. Samuel, at 14, worked the ranch alongside Keith, learning everything about running cattle and managing land. Margaret became Nora's right hand, capable of handling any household task. 2 years after Daniel was born, Nora gave Keith a daughter they named Catherine Rose. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's honey-colored hair, and she was spoiled shamelessly by her older siblings. Samuel, now a strapping 16-year-old who looked like a younger version of Keith, was surprisingly gentle with his baby sister. Margaret sewed tiny dresses. The twins made up elaborate stories to tell her. Daniel, at 2, was convinced she was his personal baby and grew upset if anyone else held her for too long. Keith would sit on the porch in the evenings with Catherine in his arms, humming old songs and pointing out stars. Nora would watch from the doorway, her heart so full it hurt. This was more than she had ever dreamed of, not just security or even happiness, but joy. Deep, abiding joy that colored every day. The years rolled on in a cascade of moments, each one precious. Samuel grew into a fine young man, capable and responsible, eventually marrying the daughter of a neighboring rancher and building a house on the far corner of Keith's land. He gave them their first grandchild, a boy named Keith Samuel, and watching Keith hold his grandson while tears rolled down his weathered face made Nora cry too. Margaret became a teacher, taking a position at the school in Winnemucca and boarding in town during the week. She came home on weekends full of stories about her students. The twins, Benjamin and Beatrice, remained close, eventually buying a general store together and running it with cheerful efficiency. Both married within a year of each other, expanding the family even more. Daniel and Catherine grew up secure in their parents' love and the affection of their much older siblings. They had none of the trauma the older children had carried, though they heard the stories and understood how lucky they were. Daniel became a veterinarian, studying in California and returning to help the ranchers of Humboldt County. Catherine married a lawyer and moved to Carson City, but visited often with her own growing family. Through it all, through every joy and sorrow and ordinary moment, Keith and Nora remained the center, the foundation on which everything else was built. They grew old together, their hair going gray, their hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, but their love only deepened. On their 30th anniversary, they sat on the porch as they had so many thousands of times before. The house had been added onto twice more. The ranch expanded to include several thousand acres. Children and grandchildren filled the place for the celebration, their laughter echoing across the yard. "Did you ever imagine this?" Keith asked, taking Nora's hand. "That day you drove into Winnemucca with 4 scared children and nothing but hope." "Never. I was just trying to survive. I could not have dreamed of finding you, of building all this. Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real." "It is real. We made it real together. You and me and those 4 children who needed a home. We took a chance on each other and look what we built." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder, content. "You said you had room for 5 that day, but you made room for so much more than that. You made room for love and family and a future I could not imagine. You saved us, Keith." "No," Keith said, kissing the top of her head. "We saved each other. That is what love does. It makes room for however many people need it, and it grows to fill every space. I was alone in this house, working myself to death and calling it a life. You and those children taught me what living actually means." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family. Samuel was showing his sons how to throw a rope, just as Keith had once taught him. Margaret was organizing the younger children into a game. The twins were setting up tables for the evening meal. Daniel and Catherine were deep in conversation with their spouses, probably planning some new adventure. "We did good, did we not?" Nora said softly. "We did better than good. We created something beautiful, something that will last long after we are gone. Every one of these children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, they are proof that love wins. That taking a chance on each other was the best decision either of us ever made." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the family gathered for dinner. Long tables were laden with food, multiple generations crowding together, sharing stories and laughter. Keith said grace, thanking God for bringing Nora to him, for giving him a family when he had thought he would spend his life alone, for every blessing large and small. When he finished, everyone echoed his amen. Then Samuel stood, raising his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To the man who took in a scared widow and 4 hungry children and gave us not just a home but a father. And to the strongest woman I have ever known, who taught us that sometimes you have to risk everything for a chance at something better. You showed us what love looks like. You built this family from nothing but hope and hard work and determination. We are all here because of you. Thank you." The toast was echoed around the tables, glasses raised, voices joining in celebration. Keith and Nora looked at each other, decades of shared memories passing between them in that glance. They had been so young when they met, so damaged and scared. But they had chosen each other, chosen hope over fear, love over loneliness. Later that night, long after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Keith and Nora prepared for bed in the room they had shared for 30 years. Keith helped Nora with the buttons on her dress, his fingers clumsy but patient. She helped him remove his boots, a nightly ritual that had become second nature. In bed, they lay facing each other, hands clasped between them. "I would do it all again," Nora whispered. "Every hard moment, every sacrifice, every fear, all of it just to end up right here with you." "As would I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Lancaster. My heart, my home, my whole world." They kissed, tender and sweet, a promise renewed. Then they settled into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The years continued their steady march. Keith and Nora eventually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, turning it over to Samuel and his sons. They spent their time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, tending a smaller garden, taking slow walks around the property they had built together. Keith developed a cough the winter he turned 72, a persistent thing that worried Nora. She made him see the doctor in town, who diagnosed him with pneumonia and ordered rest. Keith obeyed reluctantly, spending his days in bed or sitting by the fire, frustrated by his weakness. Nora tended him with the same fierce devotion she had shown through 30 years of marriage. She made him broths and teas, read to him, held his hand through feverish nights. The children took turns visiting, each wanting to see their father, to tell him they loved him. One afternoon, when the house was quiet and it was just the two of them, Keith took Nora's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "I need you to know something. Hush, save your strength." No, I need to say this. If I had never met you, if you had never driven into Winnemucca that day, I would have lived my whole life and never known what I was missing. You gave me everything, Nora. Purpose, family, love. You made me whole. Whatever happens, I need you to know that every single day with you was a gift. Tears streamed down Nora's face. You cannot leave me. You promised we would grow old together. We did grow old together. We had 30 beautiful years and a whole lifetime of memories. If this is all the time we get, it was enough. It was more than enough. Keith recovered from that bout of pneumonia, to everyone's relief. But he was never quite as strong afterward, his body slowly failing despite his indomitable spirit. He made it to 75, saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, walked Catherine's daughter down the aisle when she married. He passed quietly one spring morning, Nora holding his hand, all of their children gathered around. His last words were, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for loving me. I will wait for you." The funeral was the largest Winnemucca had ever seen. Ranchers came from across the state to pay their respects to the man who had been unfailingly honest and kind. The church could not hold everyone who came, people standing outside in the spring sunshine. Samuel gave the eulogy, speaking of the father who had chosen them when he did not have to, who had worked beside them and taught them everything worth knowing about how to be good people. My father used to say that family is not just who you are born to, but who you choose to love. He chose us, and in doing so, he gave us everything. We will miss him every day, but we will honor him by loving each other the way he loved us completely, unconditionally, forever. Nora stood at the graveside after everyone else had left, staring at the fresh earth. She was 71 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, but in that moment she felt as alone as she had at 26 when Daniel had died, but only for a moment. Then Samuel's arm came around her shoulders. Margaret took her hand. The others gathered close, a living wall of love and support. "We are here, Mama," Samuel said gently. "We will always be here, just like he would want." Nora lived another 5 years, spending them surrounded by the family she and Keith had built. She told stories to great-grandchildren about the day she drove into town with nothing but hope and 4 scared children, about the cowboy who had said he had room for 5, and then made room for so much more. She showed them the blue shawl Keith had given her that first Christmas, carefully preserved. She walked them around the ranch, pointing out things Keith had built, places where important moments had happened. On the day she died, peacefully in her sleep at 76, the family gathered again. They mourned, but they also celebrated. Celebrated a woman who had survived impossible hardship, who had been brave enough to risk everything for her children, who had built an empire of love that would last for generations. Samuel stood in the cemetery between his parents' graves, his own hair now gray, his children and grandchildren gathered around. "They were both brave," he said quietly. "Braver than I think they ever knew. They took a chance on each other when neither of them had any reason to believe good things could happen. And from that chance, from that moment of courage, all of this came." He gestured at the assembled family, dozens of people connected by blood and love. "We exist because they chose each other. We are here because a widow needed help and a cowboy said he had room. That is our legacy. That is what we pass on, the knowledge that love is always worth the risk, that family is what we make it, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is say yes to hope." As the sun set over the ranch that had been the foundation of it all, the family returned to the house. The place had been updated and modernized over the years, but the bones were still the same: the house Keith had built, the home Nora had made. They would sell it eventually, none of the children quite able to maintain the big place now. But for tonight, They gathered there one last time, sharing memories and tears and laughter. Samuel stood on the porch as the stars came out, remembering the day they had arrived, 4 scared children in a worn-out wagon, a tired mother at the reins, and a stranger who had offered them everything. He remembered Keith teaching him to rope, Nora singing as she cooked, the way his parents had looked at each other like the other person was the answer to every question that mattered. "Thank you," he whispered into the night, "for choosing us, for showing us what love looks like, for building this. We will remember. We will pass it on. Your story will not be forgotten." The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the echo of laughter and love, of promises kept and dreams realized. Somewhere in the stars, maybe 2 souls were reunited, together again after a brief separation. A widow and a cowboy who had taken a chance on each other and built something that would outlast them both. In the house, the family continued their gathering, telling stories, keeping the memory alive. Children who had never met Keith or Nora learned about their courage, their kindness, their enduring love. The story of how they had found each other became legend, passed down through the generations as proof that sometimes miracles happened, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, that saying yes to hope was never a mistake. Years later, one of Catherine's great-granddaughters would write a book about them, piecing together journals and letters and oral histories. She would title it Room for 5, and it would become a bestseller, inspiring people across the country with the story of 2 people who had chosen each other against all odds. But the real legacy was not in books or stories. It was in the dozens of descendants who carried forward the values Keith and Nora had instilled: kindness, courage, the absolute certainty that family was worth fighting for. It was in the way they loved each other, in the way they opened their homes to those who needed help, in the way they faced hardship with grace and celebrated joy with whole hearts. The ranch eventually became a historical site, preserved as an example of frontier life and the cattle industry that had built Nevada. Visitors walked through the house, saw the bedroom where Keith and Nora had slept, the kitchen where she had cooked thousands of meals, the porch where they had courted and dreamed. They read the plaques that told the story: widow arrives with 4 children, cowboy says he has room for 5, love changes everything. But the real story was bigger than any plaque could convey. It was about 2 broken people who had found each other and made each other whole. It was about children who had known loss and found security. It was about taking chances and building futures and the absolute transformative power of love. On warm summer evenings, when the light hits the old ranch just right, you can almost see them, a man and a woman sitting on the porch, hands clasped, watching their family grow and thrive. You can almost hear the laughter of children, the ring of a hammer as Keith makes repairs, the song Nora hummed as she worked. You can almost feel the love that soaked into those walls, the promises that were kept, the dreams that came true against all odds, because some love stories do not end. They echo forward through time, touching lives not yet born, inspiring hope in people who need to believe that good things can happen, that courage is rewarded, that saying yes to love is never wrong. Nora Nielson Lancaster and Keith Lancaster built more than a ranch, more than a family. They built proof that the human heart is capable of incredible resilience, that love can bloom in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust a stranger who says he has room for you. Their story began with a desperate woman and 4 hungry children pulling into a dusty Nevada town in 1882. It continues today, in every descendant who chooses love over fear, who opens their heart to someone in need, who believes that family is not about blood but about choice and commitment and showing up every single day. That is the true legacy of the widow and the cowboy, not just the children they raised or the ranch they built, but the understanding that we are all capable of creating our own miracles. We just have to be brave enough to say yes when love offers us a chance, to trust that sometimes strangers become family, and to believe that there is always room for one more, for five more, for as many as need a place to call home. The sun sets over Winnemucca, Nevada, just as it has for over a century. The desert blooms briefly in spring, the mountains stand eternal, and somewhere in the wind, if you listen carefully, you can hear the echo of a promise kept. I've got room for five, and the love story that grew from those simple words into something that changed the world, one heart at a time.